Okay, we'll get started. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming along this morning to this Conservative Home event in partnership with the LSE on turbocharging entrepreneurship and driving growth across the United Kingdom. I'm Angus Parsab-Wyatt from Conservative Home, and thank you to everyone watching on the live stream at home as well. We'll have time for questions later on, but we'll rattle through the panel and introduce you to everyone. So first up, I'm joined by Dr. Juanita Gonzalez-Uribe, so hopefully I said correctly, from the LSE. So Dr. Gonzalez works a lot on accelerators and the kind of link between business, universities, investors. If you'd like to start by just telling us a bit more about that, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here. At the LSE, we're always thrilled to be part of the conversation whenever it comes to entrepreneurship and growth policy. So I don't think I have to convince you of this, but we care about entrepreneurs. And the reason for that is that they're a crucial part of the economy. They create jobs, they pay taxes, and they also build wealth. But we also know that entrepreneurs face constraints to growth, and that's what I want to talk about right now. Now, there are two broad constraints. One is funding gaps, so the inability that some entrepreneurs may have in raising financing. There's a lot to be said about that. But since I've been asked about business accelerators, let me now tell you about another constraint to growth that entrepreneurs face, which is a constraint that I call the capabilities gap. And what exactly is that? So capabilities are the resources and skills that entrepreneurs need to grow their business. And they include knowledge about growth strategies. So for example, should I expert? And if so, how should I go about it? It also includes knowledge about how to raise financing. Should they do this? And from whom? Should it be a business angel? Should it be a bank? And under what terms? Now, the thing with capabilities is that many entrepreneurs lack them. Now, what does that matter? It matters because if we focus only on implementing measures that will increase the funding that is available for entrepreneurs, we're not going to see such a big impact. Now, why is it the case that many entrepreneurs lack capabilities? What's going on here? Well, it turns out that many of these capabilities, we don't teach at schools, and we don't teach at universities either. And part of the reason is that really understanding these capabilities requires what we call learning by doing. You need to go through the experience of building a business to really understand exactly what that entails. That's part of the reason why second-time or serial entrepreneurs are more successful than first-timers. In the process of building their first company, or maybe failing, they've learned so much about how to do this, and that is something that first-timers cannot tap into. So what can we do in terms of policy when it comes to capabilities gaps? What can we do? One popular policy are business accelerators. So what are these? They are known as schools for entrepreneurs, and what they do is that they provide opportunities for capability building to entrepreneurs and sometimes funding. And in my research, what I found is that accelerators have a very important impact on the economy by helping participating businesses precisely build those capabilities. How do they do that? Well, they provide entrepreneurs with those opportunities to create experience. They go through the experience of building their businesses together with the rest of the participants in the cohort, and that helps them build the capabilities and grow their businesses. Now, another important impact that accelerators can have that goes beyond participants is really helping construct and connect ecosystems. And so in a report that I co-wrote with base in 2019, we were exploring the effects and the impact of business accelerators in the UK economy. And an important result from that study was that accelerators in the UK are helping attract to regions investment. Venture capital investment. And that helps entrepreneurs, even those that are not participating in the programs. Now, to be sure, this is not only concentrated in London. So in a recent report from the Center of Entrepreneurs, and Tim will tell you a little bit about that, or a lot about that in a second, they find that nowadays we have accelerators across all the local enterprise partnership regions in the UK. So the potential for really important ecosystem effects is there for the taking. Now, I want to end with a final policy recommendation, and this, again, is going to echo Tim's report, and it's mainly for us as a country to aim at building ecosystems rather than just programs. So while accelerators can have important ecosystem effects, undoubtedly their impact depends on local conditions. These programs will have more permanent effects if there are complementary resources available to entrepreneurs in the regions they seed. A different way to say this echoes the words of one of my colleagues. When it comes to entrepreneurship policy, we mustn't forget the art of setting the table. Just like a good dinner is not only about the quality of the food, but how we set up the table to enjoy it, the same can be said about entrepreneurship policy. Support programs will be more fulfilling if we have enough and good dinnerware. So think about the local talent. Cutlery, think about the financiers and the lawyers. Napkins, think about the clients for our businesses. And obviously, the right company, which are the ever important local entrepreneurs. And with that, I end.
Thank you, Dr. Wanisa. I noticed that the wine was missing from your table, but we'll forgive it.
I will fix that.
Hopefully today we can solve that. But so Tim Barnes, you're the Chief Executive of Centre for Entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing and how that obviously ties into some of what Wanisa said.
Thank you, I will. Thank you, Angus. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. My name is Tim Barnes. I'm the CEO of an organisation called the Centre for Entrepreneurs. Anybody want to guess what we do? We're a centre for entrepreneurs. We exist as the country's leading charity promoting, supporting and understanding entrepreneurship. So we're an independent body. And we look to develop research and understanding as to what's happening around entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurship ecosystem that Juanita mentioned. We develop and deliver programs to help teach and skill up potential future entrepreneurs. And we develop communities of practice around the kind of people who run business incubators and accelerators and in other areas that are often overlooked as sources of entrepreneurial talent, such as refugee entrepreneurship, such as people who are coming out of prisons and other areas. And we recently conducted a large survey, the largest survey that's ever been carried out in the UK, of the very business incubators and accelerators that Juanita was talking about. And we found over 750 across the country. Now, that is a number that doesn't really have context for anybody that doesn't spend their time worrying about what startups do and how they work. But it's indicative of what is going to be my key message for the first part of today, which is, in this context, you need to know 750 is a big number. It's double the number that was found the last time anybody tried to look in such a comprehensive way 5 years ago. And for the first time, we found business incubators, those predominantly physical facilities that Juanita was mentioning earlier that support startups, in every region of England. That's the first time it's happened. So if you're looking for evidence of the way in which, not necessarily strictly speaking to a levelling up agenda in the way of a conscious policy decision, but if you're looking for the signs of activity across the country, they are there. This is something that is happening in every part of the country. Doesn't mean that the same thing happens in every part of the country. One of the things that we need to recognize from a policy position is you can't have everything everywhere. If you try and have everything everywhere, what you get is a very thin layer of jam spread everywhere. I'm trying to come back to the laying the table analogy. A layer of jam spread everywhere, and actually at some points it's spread so thin you can't actually taste it. So there are things that you need to do that only happen once or twice in an economy the size of the UK. Right? There are certain specialist programs. If you're going to try and set up a specialist program for fintech, for example, and for financial services, you basically need to have it in London because that's where people are. You might run it once outside of London. That doesn't mean the rest of the country doesn't feel the advantages. So message one is there's a lot of this stuff, and the UK is really good at it. Message two, hello UK government, please stop saying that your official message is we're trying to make the UK one of the best places to start a company. Because it is one of the best places in the world to start a company. The ecosystem the UK has, which has a slight naming problem, because we call it the London ecosystem, which means the rest of the country think it has nothing to do with them. But please understand that from the outside world, if you're from outside of the UK, you think London, England, and the UK are the same place. This is, in fact, by any reckoning, at least the second or third best ecosystem in the world, and it's something that we really need to understand. And third point is that that has an implication. And the implication is that we don't need policy interventions to be introduced that actually replicate things that other countries are doing, because by and large, they're behind where we are. There are a whole load of things that we've done in the last few days and that we've done in order to extend this that are what the rest of the world copies. SEIS and EIS, which are forms of tax relief that exist, which the government has recently extended, is copied around the world as one of the ways in which you incentivize those with money to invest in startups. We need to do more of those, and we need to understand what the impact is. But overall, what we really need to do is make sure we don't screw up a good thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And turning, I guess, to more of the political angle and building on some of what both Tim and Juanita have said around regions, I think Joe Gideon, as Member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent Central and also on the APPG for entrepreneurship, what's the sort of sense of how much these startups, these accelerators and this investment in the regions is really coming through and driving part of that levelling up agenda and helping to support entrepreneurs in the Red Wall and in kind of areas like yours?
That's a great question. I'm not going to answer it because I want to say something quite different. So I come with a background of, I guess I describe myself as being an entrepreneur, but not an entrepreneur in the sense of kind of changing the world and you know, developing COVID vaccines. And the reason I'm passionate about entrepreneurship and about the role of entrepreneurship in levelling up and in places like Stoke, but across the country, is I know the difference it made in my life. I set up a business when I was unemployable. I had 2 teenagers and a baby, and I thought, well, nobody's going to employ me, so I might as well set up my own business. I didn't know how to do it. I made every mistake in the book. I could write the book on how not to, you know, what not to do. But I kept going, and that is the key. It's the resilience that you learn as an entrepreneur. I think the only difference between a successful one and a failure is, how, you know, if you keep going, because we all make mistakes. So I think that, you know, we're talking about the growth plan and economic growth. Social capitalism was a report launched yesterday here, actually, and which I co-authored. I'm passionate about the role of social enterprise, social business, and people who want to run businesses that actually have a social benefit. And in countries where you see larger numbers of these, there are high levels of productivity, there's high level of investment, and there are higher wages. So, you know, it's a bit of a no-brainer to say that is the direction we should be going. And certainly in levelling up, to enable people to be independent, to run their own businesses, and, you know, if those businesses are social businesses, all the better, I think is really important. It also speaks to those people who maybe come from non-traditional backgrounds, have not attained educationally as much as they might have done in order to go into the mainstream, but they've got a great idea and they just need a bit of support. So I'm really passionate about that, and in fact, one of the things I shouted very loudly about, you'll appreciate I'm a backbencher, so I didn't have any power on this, but I said, when we launched the Kickstart scheme, I said, well, why can't we have a Kickstart enterprise? Why does it have to be that we're saying to young people, you know, you need to find employment? Because the future of work is very much uncertain. People are going to do different things in their lives, and the skill set that we need to produce in droves is that ability to go, well, I'm not going to do the same thing all my life, therefore at some point I need to be self-employed, need to think about starting my own business, and, you know, so I started looking at the barriers, and as part of the BEIS backbench, 22 backbench committee, we did a report on enterprise. So some of the key things we looked at as barriers. Access to finance is the obvious barrier. Barriers when you're in business actually is getting paid. I'm sure anybody who's run a business will know that is often the thing that stops people dead in the water. And we came up with an idea of like a TripAdvisor type tool for seeing if your customers are reliable payers or not. And that could be overseen by the Small Business Commissioner. FE colleges, that's, for me, I was horrified to discover that we teach people to be plumbers, electricians, hairdressers, but we don't teach them how to run a business. You know, where is the logic in that you have a training which will lead you to run your own business, but you have no business skills? So that's a fundamental one. Startup Britain, startup loan campaigns we should reinvigorate. Support hubs in places like libraries, so people, say, who may not go to their local Chamber of Commerce or sort of business organisations would feel comfortable in just kind of exploring whether starting their own business is something they might think about in an environment that is a kind of a safe space. I think the DWP should have more specialists looking at helping people into self-employment, because, you know, it's clearly a viable option. I think we need to look at more flexible working and the way people engage in their businesses. So there are a huge number of elements, but I mean the key thing is that we need to believe that enterprise is the way forward for a vast number of people who haven't yet thought about it. And our schools need to show it, from primary school upwards, thinking about what you want to do in life. Because, millennials and Generation X don't just want to earn lots of money and, not care about the planet. They actually want to have a social contribution, they want to be engaged. And to me, entrepreneurship does two things. It is a massive boost to the economy, but it's also a massive boost to a sense of identity, of purpose, and, what's good about this country.
Thank you, Joe. And I think all of you have touched a little bit on the sort of the skills and the education side of this problem, which is, and I know, Joe, you sort of spoke there about FE colleges, but is there more that we need to be doing in secondary education? So before people even get into kind of higher level education, around basic skills for whether it's setting up your own business or just business in general, so people get more of a sense of how to market a product or how to market a brand or how to, do a tax return or all those sorts of things that are key skills for life. Is that something that we need to be looking at more in the education system as well?
Absolutely, because we need to, within the education system, prepare people for a different sort of life, which is that I think something like 20 jobs that you'll have between now and you die if you're a teenager haven't yet been invented. So, in a world where we don't quite know what's coming next, the ability to adapt, and that is the fundamental skill set of the entrepreneurial mindset. So it's really about attitude, because, I know that I think we're all aware of huge recruitment skills in employment, and employers say to me, we don't really care what the qualifications are, it's the attitude. The attitude is what's important. So we need to focus on that. I mean, schemes like Young Enterprise, which I was aware of a few years ago, it costs money, so schools opt in or opt out, and I think that should be an opt-in for all schools, because it helps massively. And generally, I think that there needs to be a structure around I guess it sits into personal development, doesn't it? It's not really about, do you want to run a business? It's about, what do you want out of life, and how do you think you're going to get it, and what is your skill set when things go wrong, because things do go wrong in life, and enterprise is just a vehicle for kind of personal development generally. So it's an essential in the school curriculum.
And building on that, I know you used to speak about that sort of capabilities angle, and it's almost failing to succeed, as you say, that people quite often need to fail in their first business. So one of those skills that, not so much skills, but experience that people almost need to be advised on is that you're probably going to fail, and you probably should fail in your first business if you're going to make it in the long run. So talk a bit more about how people can kind of be supported in that, and what advice they can get in terms of trying to get into sort of enterprise, as it were.
I think absolutely. I think there's something to be said about embracing failure, and it's a different type of mindset. And if you learn this while being very, very young, at school, and hopefully not until university, before that, so at school, I think that basically it forms you for life. I see this in my students all the time. So I teach entrepreneurial finance, and one of the things we do in entrepreneurial finance is we basically tell students, throughout the term, you have to come up with a business idea. So you have to need to solve a problem. You need to come up with a solution, right? Because that's your business. And then you have to tell us why your solution is convincing, right? Why would it work? And then you have to come up with all the problems you're going to face. And you're going to have to think about what are the strategies you're going to use to face those problems. I'm sure more problems will come along the way, and many of the strategies you think of are not going to work out. But the whole exercise of going through that, just thinking, take any business idea and take it to its logical conclusion, is something we should be teaching our students much more, so that when they come to, my entrepreneurial finance class, we can teach them how to be even greater, right? You don't have to form them in this very basic part. So yeah, I think that's a fundamental thing. And I think business accelerators help in that area. It's an idea of where you're in a cohort of individuals, all of which are going through similar problems as you are, and that gives you mental support, right? So I'm not the only one who's not being able to grow. Great. It also provides you with a benchmark. So if these guys are doing it, maybe I should be doing something different to get to that stage of development, which is often not so easy to get. How do you come up with what's the benchmark? What's the right benchmark for my business? So that's also important. But beyond that, the other thing that many business accelerators do is provide access to mentors. And that's another important aspect of entrepreneurship and in general of life. It's hard to do it just on your own. It's much easier if you can talk to people that have gone through the process and learned along the way. So if you can get access to those mentors, industry experts that can not hold your hand, but make it a more fulfilling experience, I think it's crucial. And so that's part of what business accelerators do too. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to put Bim on the spot now and welcome him to the panel.
Forgive me.
We've had a great time, Bim. But
I'm sure you have.
Thanks for joining us. So you obviously sit on the same APPG on entrepreneurship as Joe does, and Joe sort of neatly dodged my question around some of the work the APPG is doing. But I guess just from your perspective, feeding into this conversation around the challenges that entrepreneurs face and how the government can be supporting them better.
Okay, so the first thing, and I heard a bit of it from Juanita just now, is in politics and government more generally, people always search for the levers that are easiest for them to pull, not necessarily the levers that are the most effective. That makes sense? So in politics, people pull the lever of pass a new law or give some money. These are things politicians know how to do, okay? And actually, when it comes to entrepreneurship and business, I think that neither of those things are the most important thing. Advice, help, mentoring, and support is at least as important as anything else for promoting business and entrepreneurship. So why do I think that? Before I went into politics, when I was in productive employment, real job, I was a corporate lawyer, then a banker, and that was very much services sector, but I did sit on the boards of certain small companies. My wife runs a family business. You know, I have seen this at close up many times, and often, and she'll probably, I hope she's not, she's not here, I hope she's not listening somewhere. You know, often I think that the difficulties that she faces are often around advice, support, mentoring type difficulties rather than, you know, needing to change a regulation here or there or whatever. So I think that the first thing is we need to provide a more effective network of that. Unfortunately, there aren't enough LSEs in the world or in this country. We need to have something that is lower cost, more accessible across every part of this country so that people can have the advice and support that they need, because they don't need money, they often just need someone to give them a bit of guidance. That's the first point. Second, now being a politician, I'm now reaching for the thing that I understand. The second thing is change tax treatment. Now this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. We privilege debt finance over equity finance. And what that, and in practical terms, what that means is if you take on lots of debt, that can be netted off against your income, and that is a benefit to you. You do not have the same advantages with equity finance. So we have a culture that is geared towards, and a whole financial services system that is geared towards people taking on much more debt. That means that when you want to grow your business, either they've already taken on a huge amount of debt, so it's hard to grow, or even if they haven't, the first port of call people think of is, I need to get more lending. You know, I want to borrow more money. That's not always wrong, of course. We need debt, but that's not always the right thing. And so actually, getting more equity investment in all parts of the country, it's good in certain patches, it's good in London, it's good in the southeast, it's good in certain sectors, better in certain sectors than others, I think is very important. The third thing is we need to realize, and this is very much for conservatives, we need to realize that deregulation is not a panacea. Now, I like deregulation as much as the next red-blooded conservative. I do. You know, I wake up in the morning and I think, get rid of these annoying laws that are ruining my life and making health and safety and all these things. And they're a pain. They are. And if we were to get rid of lots of them, it would make our life a bit easier. It would. But would it completely transform entrepreneurship in this country? No, it would not. And the most important thing is culture. And being a conservative, I recognise that why I'm a conservative rather than a socialist is because I think that you've got to see the world and human beings and communities as they actually are, and through history and tradition tells me that people are and how they behave, rather than imposing my own view and trying to force the whole world to do it my way, which is broadly the socialist attitude. Now, if you accept that as a conservative, you've also got to accept that culture is often the biggest determinant of what happens. What Juanita was saying about the fear of failure being a significant impact, we've got to try and change this in our country. We all know one of the reasons why the United States is economically successful is not because they've got, huge amounts of energy, though that's helpful at the moment particularly, but it's because their culture is one that prizes and venerates almost people who've made money, entrepreneurship, taking a risk, having a go. In Britain, to a lesser extent than mainland Europe, but it's still, we're more European than American in this respect, it's a failure. You see someone, oh, what's so-and-so doing? Oh, their business failed. Everybody feels sorry for them. Oh, I should buy him a drink next time I see him in the pub. There isn't a sense of, oh, what was that business? Oh, what's he doing next? Maybe I might help him with his next business. He's probably learnt something from that business having failed. Nobody says that in this country. And I think that, how do we change that culture? One idea. We should have, so we've got all these awards, MBEs, OBEs, CBEs, and the rest. We should have a very, very prestigious award for entrepreneurship and business, and very deliberately give it to people who have failed. And give it to people who have failed and then been successful. And almost, we shouldn't give it to the people that have just been lucky enough or clever enough to sort of hide their failures. We should give it to people who have failed, and we should make it a part of giving them this award. It should be given by the king and the royal family. We should really prize it, because showing people that that is a good, positive thing for our country is important, because it's the opposite of socializing risk, right? In effect, by having a business idea that goes wrong, you are helping the broader system become a more effective economy. And I think that is something, that sacrifice is something that should be championed.
Thank you, Ben. One of the things you mentioned in there was the G word, as it is, which is growth, which is obviously now the driving...
Did I say growth? That means I'm obviously been implanted with a chip.
I was going to say, you've been sent from on high, which is very welcome. So growth is obviously now, that's the big thing that we're all talking about. That is the driving thing behind this new administration's agenda. Thinking about the growth plan, thinking about the opportunities, but also the challenges currently presented by the current setup. Tim, I know you spoke earlier about some of those tax reliefs and incentives. What is it that you're looking for, either from the growth plan that's been announced or the hopefully more mini budget that's coming later in the autumn? What is it that you're looking for in terms of support for entrepreneurs?
So it's a good question. I think that there's a first part of this, just to echo what I said earlier, which is actually we do a lot, right? We talked about some of the tax breaks, SEIS, EIS, and so on, and some of those elements. And in the last couple of weeks, there have been some small changes, speaking to the agenda that Ben was outlining, which many of you, if you might not have noticed. Anybody know how many employees a company needs to have as a ceiling, or rather has below, in order to qualify as a small business or a small or medium-sized enterprise, an SME? 250. Who said 250? Yeah, you're all wrong. It's now 500. As of the 1st of October, Liz Truss announced a change in that. Now, it sounds like a small thing, right? It sounds like a small administrative thing. But actually, that means that there are now dozens of things that many of the organizations with between 250 and 500 people used to have to do that they don't need to do anymore. They changes what they have to do for having a data protection officer, changes GDPR. It enables people to claim back certain levels of sickness pay from government and so on by simply changing definitions. So it was a technical change. It was quite an astute technical change. It's actually going to cause massive problems for academics for years to come, because we suddenly changed a definition, and the like-for-like comparison is going to make all of our analysis terribly difficult. But that is a small price to pay for the overall economic benefit. There's a whole load of other things that we can do that assist there. But we've talked a lot about culture, and we talked about it in culture of schools. I'd like to say that one of the most important things, because I don't 100% agree with Bim, and I'm sorry, Bim, but it's okay because you're at the far end of the table from me. And it's not
I'm to Tim's far right.
yeah. That's an internal joke. That's fine. The truth is that actually, when we actually do so many things that are right, we have to be careful that we don't mess some of those things up. So some of the predominance of the business incubators and accelerators that we discussed earlier, a majority, about 95%, receive a large slice of their funding from the public sector. There are reasons why that is probably necessary. There are reasons why it's very hard for companies to invest and sponsor startups and actually be able to see a return in a meaningful amount of time. So there's a bit of a necessity for it. And over time, most of that money has come from EU sources and things called structural funds. That's being replaced by a program called UK SPF. We do not need to go into the basis of that. But here's the unexpected bit. It's a big enough check. Nobody's saying the check needs to be bigger, right? So when you go and talk to policymakers, the expectation is, oh my gosh, your funding scheme. And they're all like going, oh no, they're going to ask for more money. We can't do that. That's not the problem. The problem is we have devolved UK SPF to a level that is so low down, we can't do anything meaningful with it. We've taken the money down to a level where for some of these activities, we're going to give it to local councils and district councils in some cases, who might therefore have a cheque for £30,000 or £40,000 to put towards a local business support scheme. Now, in some of these areas, we need 2 or 3 support schemes for the country. Right? We used to do this through a regional element, or whether or not it was through regional administrations, as used to be, or whether or not it's through LEPs. That was a sensible, relatively sensible level, but even that was probably too small. So we need to be careful that our own desire to get things right, to give people control, to push the money to places where people can make decisions, doesn't also mean that we push it down to a point where you can't actually meaningfully do anything with it. So in all of this, one of the things I'd like to get to that would improve growth would be to have an honest understanding that it's okay for somebody in, say, Bristol to start a high potential company that's going to benefit the rest of the UK, and the fact that I live in Leicester doesn't mean that that's not in my interest. And that is a conversation that goes slightly against what we've been saying for the last 10 years in the way that it's communicated. But in actual fact, if we really want growth, we need to make sure that the right level of funding and support goes to the right companies in the right places. And at the moment, that's something where the political agenda is taking us in a different direction.
We'll move to questions in a second, but I know, Juanita, I think we were discussing this before around that kind of the growth plan area and some of the opportunities that it could present, or the kind of new drive for growth, the opportunities it could present for entrepreneurs. What is it that you want to see the government? I know Tim's obviously spoken there, that, and I know the Chancellor will be happy to hear that it's not necessarily about funding, but what is it that you want to see in terms of some of those elements of support that the government could be giving to help drive entrepreneurship?
So I want to highlight the plans to reform the fee charge cap on defined contribution pension schemes. The potential for this policy to turbocharge UK private markets is huge. So 2/3 of DC default arrangements make no investment into private equity, which is the main source of finance for high growth entrepreneurship. So a well-designed reform would allow UK private markets to tap into funds worth roughly 500 billion, which can be transformational for an industry that has a current size of 3.2 billion. Now, to get a sense of how important this regulation can be, I think it's important to consider the case of the US. So state pension funds are the main providers of capital to private equity in that country. And in my own research, I have shown how changes similar to the ones that have been proposed can have a very important effect and lead to spectacular private equity growth, startup creation, and innovation. So all in all, apparently, this part of the growth plan, which looks tiny, can actually be a huge deal and a definite step in the right direction. However, what obstacles do I foresee, and how can they be addressed? So the main issue here is providing adequate support for pensions trustees. Poor incentives, cultural norms, and financial illiteracy abound about private equity. Now, this last point is crucial. Private equity returns vary substantially across funds. So the challenge here is not blindly increasing private equity investment, but rather exercising financial judgment in picking the right funds. But this financial knowledge is not universal. So therefore, to really unlock the potential of local private equity markets, What we need is to complement this planned reform with working in raising understanding of private equity across trustees and setting incentives for them. So I think that's going to be fundamental.
Thank you, Juanita. Did you want to come?
No, so I agree, and Juanita obviously had already worked out what I was going to say. So the only thing I would add to what you've said is that it's not just a question of incentives or even cultural norms. It's that the whole industry, because of the legacy, I suspect, of Robert Maxwell and that period of time and equitable life in the 90s, the whole industry is stuck in a world where performance is not a metric that anyone cares about. What you care about is not losing money. And those two things are very, very, very different. Because unless we can do all the things that you were saying, but on top, actually change what they are solving for. It's not just giving them an incentive to invest in private equity or invest in something else, actually change the law around pension trustees and what they have to consider. You're not going to get because frankly, there'll be some pension trustees that don't have the capacity to do that sort of financial analysis, in which case they should go and do something else, and we should get people in who can, because, and this benefits all of us, right? There'll be people sitting here thinking, well, it doesn't really matter. I mean, what I care more about is that my pension is okay and I don't need it to be amazing. Okay, you might think that, but because everybody's living longer and the state has less and less money to provide for people as they live longer and longer, it's going to mean all of us have a much poorer old age unless we get this right. And it's really, really important. So helping the Conservative government and members of Parliament put forward the precise changes that would be needed to pension trustees, which, by the way, they will fight, because they quite like being pension trustees. You know, they quite enjoy this position. We shouldn't ignore that there'll be vested interests who want to keep things exactly the way that they are, but we need to go through that so that we can improve the outcomes over time for everybody.
Jade, sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a massive role for the private sector in this as well. I think we've kind of forgotten them. So Stoke, we have one of the most inspiring sort of rags to riches stories in Bet365. Bet365, the largest online sports gaming business in the world, was started, sort of spit and sawdust betting shops and a burger van outside Stoke City Football Club, and now the Coates family own Stoke City Football Club and are doing very well and employ 4,000 people in the city. And that sort of thing is inspirational to young people growing up in the city who think, you know, well, they started with nothing and they're a local family, you know, I could do that too. And I think that's massively important. That Peter Coates has just donated £20 million to Staffordshire University for an entrepreneurship scheme, for a sort of master's degree for people who haven't done a degree before, but, you know, helping people to become entrepreneurs. So I think this is a really important thing. The other thing I'd like to mention is the Community Wealth Fund and dormant assets, because I think that some of that could go to embracing social business and investing in social business for the benefit of communities.
I guess that point around Bet365 sort of alongside BIM's idea for the Entrepreneur Award for Failure, we should also be telling more of the stories of those rag to riches stories to inspire people to follow that themselves, and get that advice out to people as to how they did that, and hopefully tell their stories of failure that probably came along the way too. So we'll take some questions from the audience. Just before we do, if I could ask you, when you are called to ask a question, to say your name and where you're from, and please do keep it short to a question, not a statement. If it's a statement, we will cut off the microphone. So I'll go to this gentleman here first, please. There's a microphone coming towards you.
Hi, thanks very much, and I certainly empathise with a lot of BIM's talked about. Having spent 3 months trying to launch a software business in the US, the culture and the acceptance of what you're trying to do is much greater. But I think this was about how can the government turbocharge entrepreneurship. And it's all very well saying pension funds and give money to smaller businesses or whatever else. But at the end of the day, as Joe mentioned, Bet365 started out as a small business that was probably funded by family and friends. I'm a county councillor at Worcestershire, Adam Kent, and I sit on the cabinet there. And we've had a business start from a back bedroom there, Gymshark.
Yep.
If anybody's seen the application process for SEIS, seriously, you have to appoint professional advisors, and you need a lot of money to be able to do it, and there's no guarantee of success, and that you're going to get it through. Why can't we consider what we can do with giving tax relief to those family and friends that invariably start that person in that bedroom? That means that if that person does fail BIM, but they try again, that the damage to the state purse is not that great. But at least that way, you'd have something below SEIS that could encourage those small entrepreneurs.
I agree. I think we should do that. And the only reason why I can think it hasn't happened is that the nature of Treasury is such that they make everything incredibly painful and difficult to do, particularly when it comes to any tax relief, because institutionally they don't really trust tax reliefs. And I've spoken to the Chancellor about this, and I won't speak for him, but I think he recognises my point. And I think it's one of the things that over the next couple of years we've got to try and move the dial on.
Yeah, true.
Tim, did you want to add anything on that?
No, I'm just nodding on that one a lot, very vigorously.
In agreement. One on the end over here. One more area. Yeah, just the lady there.
Hello, thank you. This is fascinating. I am Angela Sterling. I'm a Redwall entrepreneur and an elected county councillor in Durham. The message that female entrepreneurs are getting, so my question is, how are you going to turbocharge female entrepreneurship in the Redwall? Because women tend to own smaller businesses, and up in the northeast it seems like everyone's interested in blue-collar manufacturing businesses that are male-dominated, rather than white-collar, smaller, female-led businesses. The LEPs are very much set up as jobs for the boys, and the business accelerators that I tried to access, because I'm fascinated by growth, want to turbocharge. I've got an international franchise, but the business accelerators all wanted compulsory sessions at 4 p.m. I've got 2 kids. So what can you do specifically for female Redwall businesses? Thank you.
Joe, do you want to take this on as
Yes.
someone who set up a business
No,
as a
abs-
woman and might be able to speak to that better than I?
Absolutely, and I feel your pain. You're absolutely right, and you know, there's been a lot of research done. I mean, sadly, whilst everybody recognises that more needs to be done, it still isn't being done enough. I think there's also an issue around, in terms of access to finance. We did an inquiry around venture capital, and I think only 1.9% of all venture capital goes to female-led entrepreneurs. It's an incredibly low figure. And if you look at the reasons why, often the decision makers are men, and, you know, forgive me, unconscious bias. I think there is possibly, as you say, an expectation of what a business looks like. And women, I'm going to generalise now, but, you know, certain female-led businesses may look and feel and sound different from what male venture capitalists or bank managers or people in advice centres think will succeed. And so it really is a bit a problem. So we need more women in the entire sort of supply chain or the support network for female entrepreneurs. I think it's really interesting that female entrepreneurs are actually a better bet because, again, theoretically, women are less risk averse. So from a banking point of view, they should be a safer bet. I mean, speaking personally, I probably wasn't, but yes, it is a massive problem. And, yes, and I think, I mean, hopefully the government is going to be saying something around childcare and helping, but, you know, inevitably, women generally do pick up that burden more, and so, you know, special help needs to be available. So more women, not just running, you know, female-led businesses, but actually helping in the entire ecosystem for women.
Can
Tim,
I just add one quick thing? So one of the things we do at the CFE is we have a program called NEF, which is our support program for ambitious entrepreneurs. It's not an investment in businesses, with apologies to Chris. We're not trying to build portfolios. We're trying to invest in a future generation of entrepreneurs. We have about 65% female participation rate, and one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is to launch in the Northeast. So if you want to come talk to me about how we do that in 2023, and as a charity, particularly if you've got a cheque you want to give us, Chris, then there'd be definitely
always selling, always selling.
There you go. Even as a charity.
I think there's one down the front here.
Hello, Stuart Barr, arts and digital entrepreneur. But it is my wife who, following on from the previous lady, is a mumpreneur, in her own words. And I think it's something that's really, really important that we look at this from an educational perspective. Because she was invited to go in and do a careers day at an all-girls school where children were introduced to the professionals. They were to the lawyer, to the doctor, etc. And then in the corner somewhere was this mumpreneur who'd set up her own business around her own desire to bring up children. And actually, from a career perspective, if you think about it, all those girls who were being pointed towards the doctors and the lawyers, etc., are all going to have massive problems with how to juggle childcare if they decide to go down that route. Whereas the woman who had complete autonomy was the person who set up her own business in the corner. And I don't think we value that enough in career advice at secondary level. So that was a challenge to the panel. How can we do it better?
So one of the very small things, and we've been slightly, we've glossed over this slightly as a panel. We're talking about entrepreneurs and startups like that's an homogenous group, and it isn't. There are those which are very much, they might be lifestyle businesses, but they are the difference between being economically active and not economically active. There are the people who've decided that this is a small thing that they want to do and grow it, and all of these are to be welcomed. And at the other end of the scale, there are the potentially high-growth businesses that might attract venture capital and grow in a different way. But that is a small single-digit percentage of the businesses. So one of the things we need to make sure we've got is a breadth of understanding, a breadth of appropriate support mechanisms, and a breadth of opportunities for people to pursue all of those. And what we need to do is have a slightly less lazy, bundle them all together approach to call them all startups. The high potential startups, the lifestyle business and others are all valuable for different reasons, have different social and economic impact, but we need to separate them out when we're trying to explain things like how should the government support them.
Yeah, I just want to say something short. We spoke about the role of mentorship and how important that is. But we haven't spoken enough about role models. And something we know from research is that first, role models had a very important impact. They can impact the way that entrepreneurs grow their businesses, even if you don't provide them with training, even if you don't provide them with funding. Just having an inspiring story that they can connect to is very important. The second thing we've learned from research is that it's not just any person that works as a role model. It has to be someone you can identify with. So it doesn't work if you have Steve Jobs no longer with us, but if Steve Jobs were to walk into the room and say, these are all my struggles, I've built this business, I'm amazing, you'll be like, well, good for you. I'm not going to be Steve Jobs. So we need more people like your wife, more other women who are building their own businesses, to go into the schools, also into the universities, to be celebrated with awards, so that now our young children, men or women, have more models to look up to and build their own businesses.
There's a question down the end here.
Hi, it's just a quick question for the panel. I'm Bill, and in the context of this, I'm just a daddy. So my daughter has actually just done her GCSE picks, and she chose to do a BTEC in enterprise. And when I went to the parents' evening to look at the different options, I noticed that some of the documents would say BTEC in business studies, some said BTEC in enterprise, and I asked them, I said, well, why are you promoting this as a BTEC in business studies when this says it's a BTEC in enterprise? And the answer was, well, our parents don't understand what enterprise is. And it was just a comment and perhaps a question for Tim as to how that could be fixed, and as a supplementary, perhaps if he's got time, Tim might come up and speak to my daughter's class.
Where are you? Where are you?
Cumbria.
Yeah, fine. I do that, and I also, as Juanita alluded to earlier, I also teach in university, just a different one in London, so I'm not mentioning it. But there's definitely opportunities to do that. Again, one of the things we've talked about on the panel when we've got backwards and forwards is what we might do in schools and what we might do in education and so on. And there's a differentiation that we need to be clear on, one between what is generally in education terms defined as the enterprising skill set, which is, how do you do these things? Some of the things Joe mentioned earlier about some of the financial literacy and some of the processes that might be involved in going out and writing a business plan and doing things like that. And one of them is an entrepreneurial mindset, which is simply to say, actually, it's a thing, right? This is a thing you can go and do. About 10 years ago, I set up a charity project called Citrus Saturday. And we started it with 30 school kids in Camden. And the idea was that these kids who didn't really have any exposure to any of these things would be able to go out and have some encouragement to go and start a little business venture, which was selling lemonade on, to members of the public on pavements, in order to be able to get an understanding that this is a thing they could do. They didn't have to be the coolest kid in school or the first one that got picked for football. They had to be the one that got up off their arse for 3 Saturdays in a row, and they'd make some money. And we didn't start by telling them, as some of the schemes do, this is what a company is, and we're going to allocate shares, and we're going to do this, because that just turns everybody off. We didn't tell them we were going to do this for the worthy cause of a charity down the road or raising money for the school. We said, what's a thing you want, right? What's the thing you want? It's, an Xbox, a bike, whatever it is. Right, how much do you need for that? 100 quid. Well, we may not make that. We may make all of it for you or not. But how much lemonade would you have to sell to make 100 quid? Oh, I don't know. Right, well, let's work that out. And you work it backwards from the objective. So you're changing the understanding that this is a thing you can do to have control over your own life. And for me, that's the key bit. The mindset piece is you can do this. It's not about the rest of it. You can do this by trying and by opting to do it. And then the skills follow from that at a later stage. In the same way that, just as a rough guess, are there a few people here who might be involved in things like PR, lobbying, so general public, right? Nobody sits you down before you're 18 and teaches you how to write a press release, right? It's a thing that comes later once you've ascertained certain basic aptitudes and things about what you want to do. We can teach the skills later, but as Joe and others have said, the mindset piece has to come before it's been determined that they're set on a different path in life.
Yes. So I just want to tell about a project that I worked on with communities, so not just children, but an entire community in the Brecon Beacons. And it was a project by the Big Lottery, and basically a village that was in terminal decline that needed enterprise to kind of keep going. And so I was kind of parachuted in as the business expert. Developed products around herbal traditions and things, which the village was deeply connected to because of its heritage. And we had kind of community tea tasting and community packing of herbal teas. I then, as Bim has said, awards is really important. So I put us forward for a Countryside Alliance or something award for the best enterprise in Wales, which we won. I'm thinking there were probably only 3 entrants, but we won it. And
you've got to be in it to win it, Joe.
You've got to be in it to win it. So I hired a coach, and I took the entire village down to the Senedd in Cardiff to get the award. So everybody else, there was kind of one person who shook their hands and got, and that's we got brilliant. The entire village. But that gave that sense of ownership, that it was a community enterprise. And when at the end of the year I went away, they said, you're going to be, I said, no, my job is done. It's the community's business. I just kind of help get it started. But it has to sit with the community. And so, having that, as you say, understanding that of how you need to structure something in a way that means something to people, I think is really important.
I know we touched on this before, actually, before the event around what's happening with high streets and the impact of that, and it is about bringing those communities along with. You can't just say this is what we're doing. No. You have to have a stake in it.
Absolutely.
I think there was a question over the back corner over there, the lady on the end.
Hi,
I'll take the two together. So yeah,
okay.
I'll take yours and then his, and then you're both happy.
So I'm Laura from Zero, which is a platform for small business users, and we're going back to Joe's point about late payments and growth for businesses. we collect data on a monthly basis from our global small business customer base, and we can see that the time to be paid is just getting worse and worse. So for the 5th consecutive month, it's gone up. 49% of small businesses are not getting their invoices paid. So just obviously then squaring the circle with the deregulation agenda and obviously trying to, what do you do for those against big businesses? I'd just quite like to understand from the panel, how do we better support small businesses to get the money they're owed? You know, this is unapproved debt. And how do we do this given the, what this Conservative Party wants to achieve for the rest of this Parliament?
So it was that whole naming and shaming, which I think that's the only way forward. I mean, I've seen, you know, attempts by government and legislation over a number of years to suggest if somebody pays late that they pay an extra fine or whatever, and nobody does. You know, it's completely unenforceable. So I think we have to move away from the idea that you can legislate in some way to improve the late payment landscape. So the only way you can do it is to be aware of who's not going to pay you and not trade with them. You know, and I think I think the TripAdvisor sort of model would be a very powerful way of doing that.
There was some naming and shaming. I think it was on employment rights or something. And a CEO of a very big company in my constituency, who's a mate of mine, he sort of rang me up in a panic one morning. I said, "Why are you calling me?" And he said, "Oh, Bim, you know, I just want to say this was a mistake. I've taken tasks with the person responsible." I say, "What are you going on about? What are you going on about? I have no idea what you're talking about." And he was so worried about the PR of his company being listed on this thing that he was panicking. Now, in the end, it all blew over. But actually, that shows that if you name people who do bad practice, that can have, in an internet world where things spread on social media, I think that can do way more than snarling them up for years in small claims court or whatever.
Yep.
There is a campaign called Good Business Pays that is putting together that data. It's not quite got the traction there. You know, all the big businesses are listed.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting.
We should get, I mean, it should be a press release from gov.uk. You know, it should be an absolutely national thing that everybody knows. All the newspapers and TV, radio, they'll get it, and it'll be on Leading the Today programme. You know, and I think if that sort of thing happens, you'll see people very quickly adapt.
And it should also be said that one of the worst payers is government. It's responsible for 45% of UK GDP, and they don't pay on time.
Is it as high as 45?
That's killer. Yeah, it's basically where 45% of UK GDP is government, basically. So, or thereabouts. And most Western economies are similar, and they tend to have something like a 50 to 100% longer repayment cycle than other businesses.
I mean, also to that point, it's not just late payment, but it's about bad business and business that's not going to pay at all. Because let's face it, we've all come across companies that buy things from you and then don't pay you ever. So I think that it's also really keen to show up the criminals.
I'm conscious of time, so I want to get a couple of questions. We'll take one there. And then.
Mike Clark, I'm speaking with three hats. Firstly, I was a beneficiary of the kind of capitally entrepreneurial ecosystem which Juanita and Tim are talking about. Secondly, I've been running a company for 22 years, which is trying to execute on all of that, and is reasonably successful, neither a failure nor a glowing success, somewhere in the middle. And thirdly, I am a leader of a governing board of a very successful state secondary school in a deprived part of Coventry. And I'm concentrating quite hard in those roles on the world of work, on apprenticeships, and vocational skills, etc., etc. Generally, I'm quite frustrated with some gaps that I perceive in the narrative on all of this. And I was delighted when Tim came round to one of them, which was that the primary bit at the top of the food chain, the capitally entrepreneurship, is a small percentage, and there's this range from micro businesses up through mom and pop operations, Me Too operations, but it's steadily expanding. My personal role model now is the Mittelstand. And so I wondered now, the question is, if you were to focus a little attention in this debate to some of those other layers, what would be your key points about those? And what impact do you think they might have relative to looking at the top level, high potential? What do you think the impact would be for the UK overall, focusing on these other layers of entrepreneurship?
Thanks. Tim, do you want to come in first?
So I'm going to half answer this. but I'm also going to point a finger at someone else, because we've had a go at pointing fingers at the investment industry and pensions. You're right that we have, partly through our own creation and media cycles, we have a slightly captive sense that a success means that you're a globally dominated big brand player, right? Actually, that isn't where the UK sits. It's not even the industries where we're particularly strong. We're really good in areas of biotech, for example, where extraordinarily clever people develop companies with drugs that you can't pronounce to cure conditions for people you've never met, but they make really good money out of it. But they'll never make the front page of the Daily Mail because they're not an evil company like a Google or a Facebook, right? So there's a difference to that. So there's a little bit of a creative problem. One of the things that we are really bad at, though, and like genuinely chronically bad at, is not just the money going into businesses at all levels, but it's how do we get the money out? And that's particularly who buys these companies, right? The vast majority of companies are not going to end up on the stock exchange. They're not going to end up as things that people run for the rest of their lives. They're mostly the exits, and the exits that you would see from those businesses coming out of on ecosystems like the United States is that the vast majority are bought by bigger businesses. And that's how most businesses are scaled. Most of the ways you go from being a small to a big business is you get bought by a larger one. Most of the ways you go from being a medium-sized business to a really huge one is that you get bought by a global company that has distribution of product, right? So Siri, for anybody who's got an iPhone, was a startup that was acquired by Apple so that it could be deployed and scaled up globally, for example. I sit on the board that has the largest number of AI seed investments in Europe. We started with 80, we're now down to about 40, roughly 20 have died, 20 have been acquired. We have the best AI ecosystem in the world in the UK. Out of those 20 companies, anybody want to guess how many of them were bought by British companies?
None.
None, right? This has been over a period of time, and this has changed. Anybody want to guess how many of those were bought by European companies, not including the UK?
Two.
One. So the two is the optimist, like that part. Bought by Braun. 70% of them are bought by American companies, 30% by Asian companies. That will go down now because many of them were Chinese, and these are sensitive technologies that the government has sensibly moved to stop from acquiring businesses. But why is it that our European companies don't want to buy innovative products, services, and activities that they can then scale to have the true economic impact that they do, that they can in the way that overseas do? That is a real quandary, not for this. But if you really want to see more successful entrepreneurial startups and companies grow, you've got to give them a place where those investors can get their money out, where the founders can see that there's a check at the end of the day. And for that, the vast majority of the world relies on people buying your companies, and it doesn't happen here.
Anyone else want to come? No? I think there's a question down the front here. If we can keep questions really short, because we're down to the last few minutes. I'll take one here.
Okay, I'll keep it very short. Except that I've run a business for 5 years, so there's only me, a single director. Can I just ask the panel quickly, does VAT tax reform have a part to play in this? We all know that the levels are like 85,000 at the moment. A lot of small companies have gone under because of that.
Yeah, I mean, Tim,
Short version, HMRC is being really good at the moment about not enforcing late payment and actually being really quite reasonable about it. That's to be welcomed. The biggest thing about VAT over the last 20 years is that roughly nearly all of the benefits to small businesses get wiped out every time you actually change the rate, because every time a small business has to print a change of menus, change the rates of what they do, you actually consume a large part of the change in the short term. So VAT, whatever you do with it, one of the things is don't mess about with the rates. More exemptions would be better. Also help the cost of living crisis. Yeah, there's so much offset to it. If you've got zero, which by the way is an amazing product and they don't sponsor me, but I'd quite like it if you did. Basically it's just now part of the £5 a month, whatever it is, chance on top. It's minimal as an effort for that. It's not a gigantic burden once you've got to that point.
Question at the back there as well. If I take these two together, so if we go to both the chaps there. Thank you.
Nicholas Moore, Wandsworth. Given that technology will be the defining feature of the 21st century, what do you think we could be doing specifically to turbocharge tech entrepreneurship in the UK?
Thank you. And take the second one as well.
Hi, just a quick one. I was a benefit of the Kickstart scheme is there anything being done similar to help businesses employ people? I guess the number one cost for micro businesses is often employment, the staff costs. We're lucky enough to have 5 employees now, but we wouldn't be where we were without the Kickstart scheme. They were our first 2 employees. So yeah, is there anything done? I know it was a COVID boost, more geared up to helping young people to get in, but there was also a huge benefit to the micro businesses, if anything's been done there.
Great, thank you. Jay, do you want to take this one on Kickstarter? I know
yeah,
you've obviously spoken about how much you want to see that.
I mean, I certainly believe that we should pay businesses to help provide people with work, to pay for people to be in work rather than not in work. I mean, the whole mental health pandemic that we've now got post-pandemic is largely to do, I think, with people not valuing the social aspect of work. On the digital one, I think it's quite interesting that obviously anybody can now start a business in their front room or a bedroom or wherever and turn into a multi-million-pound business without leaving. I think there's an interesting piece around how they come together with others. Obviously, you can do it in the virtual space, but also an anomaly that I found, that banks can't give business accounts to the under 18s. Now, it seems to me that there are probably a number of people within that digital space that could be earning quite a lot of money by the time they reach the age of 18, and that's something that maybe we should be looking at as well. Can
they open crypto accounts?
they can, but as the Bank of England governor said, that may suggest that may not be the best thing. For every pound spent on research in the UK compared to any other country in the Western world, for every pound spent on research, we file more patents. For every patent, we start more companies. The problem here isn't the quality of the research or the ability to start an innovative-based company. The issues are further down the line in how we grow those, how we scale them. And as I alluded to earlier, what the attractiveness of that is if nobody will buy your company and scale it later on. So there's plenty of things that we could be doing about that, but it should really be on the draw through the system that we have, where the starting points of it actually work quite well.
Bim, I know you want to come in on this as well.
Just to be slightly heretical, and I'm being probably deliberately provocative, to what extent do we think the government should subsidise providing, I mean, obviously COVID Kickstart was a COVID issue, and we all appreciate the special circumstances there, but in a more normal scenario, to what extent do people think the government should subsidise almost companies to employ people who, without such a subsidy, would not be employed? Because the danger of introducing this sort of thing at a mass scale is it's almost like a sort of fiscal quantitative easing, right? Like you end up providing a false cost to businesses, and by doing that, unless it's the problem with any subsidy, businesses then base business models around the fact that it's very, very cheap to employ people almost uneconomically. So we've just got to be very, very careful by imposing subsidies at any significant level to employ people. Obviously, what I think we need to do is just generally make it cheaper and simpler to employ people, full stop. But we shouldn't have specialist schemes to do it that artificially subsidise, superficially attractive that is in the short term, because it doesn't help us in the long term, and it just adds to the public purse in a way that means that probably those people shouldn't necessarily be employed for a long period of time. We've already got the apprenticeship levy. We have apprenticeships. We all appreciate that as people are young and they're learning that they have to develop and grow. But beyond that, I think it's quite dangerous.
Brilliant, thank you.
I probably said something terrible. People are going to get very offended by it.
The newspapers are running it. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But for me, my thanks to Tim, to Joe, to Anita and Bim for joining us, to LSE for partnering with us on this event, to all of you in the room for attending, and for those watching online as well. The Conservative Home Fringe continues throughout conference, both here and in our marquee, so I hope to see many of you at other of our events. And thank you very much for coming. Cheers.